In this video, we're going to talk about the Final Destination 2 movie released in 2003. We will discuss the movie story, we will review the movie story, the box office performance, and share our personal reactions. So let's begin. Look, we drove a long way to get here, so if you know how to beat death, you'd like to know. So, say pending victims to a morgue attendant in Final Destination 2, which takes a good idea from the first film and pounds it into the grounds, not to mention decapitating, electroning, showering, blowing up, incinerating, drowning, and gassing it. Perhaps movies are like history and repeat themselves first as tragedy, then as farce. The earlier film involved a group of friends who got off an airplane after one of them had a vivid perception of disaster. The plane crashes on takeoff, but then one by one, most of the survivors die as if fate has to balance its books. That movie depends on all the horror glitches of the dead teenager movie. Formula teenagers are alive at beginning, dead at end. But it is the film that is well made and thoughtful, as I wrote in my review. The film, in its own way, is biblical in its dilemma, although the students use the code word fate when what they are really talking about is God. In their own terms, in their own way, using teenage Veronica, the students had existential discussion that was then, this is now. Faithful to its gender, Final Destination 2 allows one of its original characters, Claire Rivers, played by Ellie Larter, to survive so she can be a link to the earlier film. In the new film, Claire is called upon by Kimberly Corman, played by Edgy Cook, a 20 something who is driving three friends in her SUV when she suddenly had a vision of a horrendous traffic accident. Kimberly blocks the on ramp, saving the drivers behind her when logs roll off a timber truck, gas tanks explode, etc. But is it the same old scenario? Are the people who she saved all doomed to die? There is a shot of force and unseen malevolent presence around us every day. A character Moses I prefer to call is death. The malevolent presence doesn't remain unseen for long. Soon bad things are happening to good people. In a series of accidents that Rube Goldberg would have considered implausible, in one ingenious sequence, we see a character who almost trips over a lot of toys while carrying a big Macintosh IMAX box. In his house, he starts the microwave and lights a fire under a frying pan, then drops his ring down the garbage disposable, then gets his hands trapped in the disposable while the microwave explodes and the frying pan starts a fire. Then gets his hand loose, breaks a window that mysteriously slams shut, climbs down a fire escape, falls to the ground, and finally, when it seems he is safe, well, everything that could possibly go wrong does, except that he didn't get a window machine. Other characters die in equally improbable ways. One is ironically killed by an airbag, another almost cocks in a dentist chair, a third is saved from his respirator, and so on. Although strange things do happen in real life. I came home from seeing this movie to read the story about the teenager who was thrown 25 feet in the air after a car crash only to save himself by grabbing some telephone lines. If that had happened in Final Destination 2, this car would have exploded, blowing him off the lines with a flying cow. There is a kind of dump level on which a movie like this works. Once we understand the premise, people will insist on dying oddly. Remember the story of the woman whose husband left her, so she jumped out the window and landed on him as he was leaving the building. The thing about Final Destination 2 is that the character make the mistake of trying to figure things out. They are reasoning. If you are made to die, then you owe death a life. But a new life can cancel out an old one. So, if the woman in the white van can safely deliver her baby, then that means that someone else will be saved or will have to die, I forget which. This is the kind of bookkeeping that makes you which Arthur Anderson will still around. Note the first Final Destination 2000 had characters named after famous horror film figures including Browning, Harrison, Luton, Winnie, Sherrick, Hitchcock, and Chaney. The sequel has just two that I can definitely Cormant and Carpenter, maybe. Final Destination 2, like eating a tube of Princeton at once, watching his outrageous horror flick sequel in a guilty player, it has broadly the same premise as Final Destination. Young Kimberly, A.J. Cook from the Virgin Suicides, has a terrifying vision of a crash on the highway and saves her fellow driver's lives, so the angel of death cheated of his bounty comes after them. The crash team sequence at the beginning is pretty slick, and director David Ellis delivers a ferociously volley of black comic shock and grabs an accelerating thrill right into 90 minutes. One horrified that Mark victim whimpers with fear, realizing that they are united in doom. It's like a different strokes thing. Final Destination 2 Death that reliable old nemesis is back for more in Final Destination 2 movie, which suffers for the same recented dialogue and acting problem as the original but with a much funnier pulse. The real progenitor here is less the previous pick than the stick funny horror cinema of George Romero, and that connection extends to the violence menu. Vigilance decapitation, joggings, skull piercings, amputations, and more among the entries. Unlike several recent horror attempts trembling at the thought of an R rating and thus to dampening their on screen effect, this sequel goes for the bloody gusto and will have the target older teen and horror arts eating it up with steady return customers in wit. Premise that death is a physical but unseen force ensuring the destruction of those who initially cheated it remains the same as in the original, and because there's the slyest whiff of self-parody whipping around the edge, feel even harder to take seriously this time around. Echoing the visionary gift possessed by Devon Sawa's character in the earlier pick, Kim, played by H.E. Cook, begins to see disasters before they happen. During a road trip with some pals, she envisions a horrific multi-car built on the highway they are about to enter. Built up in this sequence is impressive as Helmer and stunt maestro David R. Ellis and editor Eric Seed scratch an action to an unnerving degree. When Kim Vision is confirmed, she is rescued from her own death by Officer Thomas Burke, played by Michael Landis, who gradually realizes Kim is not only sensing the advance of death but the pattern, liking a small group of folks who, like her, should have died on the highway. Now it seems death will stalk them one by one. First to go is Ivan, whose demise too closely duplicates the staggering from one in the previous tale. Another unwelcome reminder of Final Destination 1 is the character of Claire Waiters, who somehow survived the onslaughts the last time around and has checked herself into a potted cell for protection. As a sports guide to Kim is understanding this web of doom, the dull Larter cast little light. What has become clear is that Final Destination 2 is a film of lead dialogue, punctuated by fairly sterile and unexpectedly funny action sequence. None is better than a visit to the dentist by mother and son survivors Nora and Tim Carpenter, which develop into a hilarious spoof of Hitchcockian's birds coupled with being drilled by the tooth doctor. Tough the player of the new film is its brass and thrill in the process of Death Grand Plane. It also fails to fully exploit all its gender resources. Most wasted is Tony Todd, who appears in a single, distinctly flat scene and then vanishes. Many other scenes stop cold before reaching their maximum horror potential. Coda, copped with a final gory scene mixed with a Recolian picture of peace, is just the right send off. The giddy sequence also helps is getting past the generally awful thespian lead by Cook, whose blurry grasp of emotion betrays Ellis' apparent disinterest in his actors. As the requisite stoner dude among the survivors, Jonathan Jerry offers some dry comic balance, while T.C. Carson as a skeptical Eugene energies what had been a root conception on the page. Tech package is excellent for a lower end studio vehicle spiced by the franchise now and at cable fascination with turning everyday props and atom into lethal instruments. Shirley Wackel's score displays a thorough understanding of horror jolt. Final Destination 2 production is a new line cinema release of a Zide pre-production produced by Warren Zeiss, Craig Perry, and others. Final Destination 2 movie review. Final Destination 2 is what those paid off radio critics like to call a non stop thrill ride, loosely filling into the genre of horror. It's mainly a thriller, and the thrill comes from the fact that after narrowly avoiding disaster, each and every character in the film is being stalked by death. You see, death like its house in order. If you cheat death, what you are really doing is making death angry, and when death gets angry, it gets creative. The promise is nothing new. In fact, there's someone substandard originator, nearly, pardon the pun, killed the idea entirely. For this reason, trailer of Final Destination 2 were greeted with groans month before its release. But those grounds were entirely unwarranted. Sure, the movie suffered from formulaic moment and hooky dialogue, but it transcends its weak moments and emerges as a stylish, intriguing, and often grotesque entry in the world of modern blockbuster cinema. Now, the fine film gets fine treatment with a deluxe Infinix disc, technically brilliant and stuffs with extra you actually want to see. Final Destination 2 is a disc for everyone who loves the DVD format, especially those who love their movies covered in blood. After Kimberly, played by H.E. Cook, has a premonition about a huge accident on the highway, she makes sure that herself and those around her are shielded from its effect and ends up causing a rift in death design. Death, always the perfectionist, decide that it will finish its business and take out those she saved in the same order they would have died. Anyone who saw the first Final Destination will recognize the setup. Manually, it's a convenient way to line up a bunch of bodies of extricatingly precise and often creative execution. What this film does much better than the original is carry off the death sequence, and many groups of people had a hand in making them great. Even the red herring moments in the film are fairly honored. Interpreters of filmmaking, the continuity department had to love the meticulous work involved in pulling it all off. The stunts were amazing, the CG work was seamless, and the backup department, well, they had a previable field day. More than anything, this film shines because it's such a well oiled machine. There is a sense of satisfaction in the fact that so many people had to so involved in the planning of each tiny morsel of each painful death attempts. And a further sense of satisfaction that death with a capital D is the same way precise yet with a sense of humor. It lies nothing more than to play with its prey. The actors responsible for being meat in this picture are mostly beautiful and likable, although they are all stereotypical. There's the strong, charismatic female lead, the druggie, the screaming pregnant lady, the clueless teenager, the token black guy, and the sensitive cop who believe everything the dew-eyed heroine says. There's also the reappearances of Claire Rivers, the only returning cast member from the first film, who began the film in a mental ward, scared silly. It does not take much to convince her out of her shell, which is rather weak. In fact, the primary downfall of the film is the script. Character come to conclusion about things too quickly. All of the premonition in the film happen very conveniently, and there are some pretty sappy moments down the scratch. There's even a ham-handed attempt to tie everything into the events of the first movie. At least horrible one-liners are kept to a minimum. There is a general sympathy for the character, primarily because the film does a great job of showing just how fragile life can be. A slip here, a misplaced knife there, and it's off to atone for your sins. It's not deep in any Ingmar Bergman sort of way, but I dare you to get into your car after watching this film and not think about it. I was a little disappointed when I could not get to the theater to see this one, but the video on the disc made me forget all about that. Presented in widescreen, Final Destination 2 features a beautiful transfer. The colors are crisp, especially the red. There is no artificiating, and the film moves easily from light to dark with nary a compression problem. A great looking disc can help bring the cinema to your living room, and this one does. The sound in Final Destination 2 is called on early and often to provide mood for both the bombastic stunt sequence and the quieter, earlier moments. While the score is nothing you will remember, it gets the job done, and the blend of sound effect is great. There are a lot of Rube Goldberg machinations taking place throughout the course of the film, and there had to be great Foley work in order to build the tension. There is, of course, and all of it is transferred well, although the film swings from loud exposition to pins dropping in a master of moments. There is no need to do the volume adjustment hockey pucky. The disc is presented in Dolby Digital 5.1 and 5.1 EX. Since this is an in-fin film disc, it is loaded with extras, most of which can be accessed directly while watching the movie. This, in my opinion, is the perfect way to do extras on a disc. You don't need to turn the infant film featured on while watching the disc, so they never interfere with movie viewing. However, if you do turn them on, you can select them whenever they pop up on the screen. The pop-up extras on this disc range from a screen test by A.G. Cook to the choreography of the main stunt sequence to an analysis of people's psychological reaction while watching the film. Great care went into making these features interesting and relevant, which cannot always be said for a community track. The disc also include a couple more standalone features as well as DVD room content. The extras keep adding value to an already valuable product. Good show, new line. Final Destination 2 is the movie about a year from the doomed Flight 180 air crash. Death unleashes plan to pick off a new set of good looking teenager by the most elaborate means possible. Less a sequel, more a retreat. Final Destination 2 replays all the riffs and rims of the 2000 horror sleeper. From its malicious delight in carefully ostrichted death right down to its smallest in joke, the characters' sure names are again those are famous horror movie icons Kimberly Corman, Tim Carpenter. Things get off to a bone crunching start with a spectacular multi car pile up that sets a death plan in motion. Early on, Dr. Ellis traversed some deliciously overwrought accident, but as the plot unravels, in particular, a chase to find a pregnant woman whose unborn baby can upset death applicant. The inventions run out of the steam and into bloodness. While the new set of victims fail to generate the empathy of the original lineup, the action wears between enjoyable ludicrous part exposition, a scene where the protagonists reveal their relationship to the original Flight 180 is priceless and a no doubt intention sense of camp. If it leaks the novelty factor, and artfully constructed meme of the original FD2 still managed to be enjoyable, silly Friday night fright fare. Having to rely on a middleman sucks even for death. The problem is while he gets his due, someone else, usually a guy in a hockey mask or wearing Lee press on steel knees, steal all the credits. And at least one intended victim always gets away. Jamie Curtis and Heather Langenkamp in particular have been slippery, so after years of pulling the strings behind the scenes, Death has finally decided to take matters into his own hands. That's where the Final Destination movies come in since they mark the feature debut of Death himself as a serial killer, no more sitting around playing chess in Bergman films. It's difficult to say whether the second Final Destination is better or worse than its worthy predecessor. It's certainly dumber and less coherent. But by the same token, there's an element of choreographed evident in some of the dance sequence that was not presented the first time around. I particularly like the opening, which features a spectacular car wreck and several emphatic corpuscular departures. The whole part of the movie is not really whether they are going to be a next victim, but who it will be and how they will die. After all, you cannot cheat death, or can you? Therein lies one of the Final Destination 2's innocuous flaws. It postulates that there is a cosmic loophole in the whole process. Death has a list, but apparently he doesn't check it twice if a birth occurs in the meantime. Of course, the specifics of the loophole are so nebulous that the ending is doomed not to make any sense, but that does not stop the filmmaker from forging ahead with their agenda. After all, the point of the film is the dead, not the living, and if there are a couple of people around at the end who have not been impaled, incinerated, or crushed by an Acme 10-ton weight, will anyone care? Since survival has something to do with procreation, I expected that alpha male to impenetrate all the women. Kimberly Corman is just about to pull onto the freeway when she has a horrifying premonition of death and destruction. In a panic, she stops in the middle of the ramp, blocking traffic and not allowing anyone behind her to merge. So when the accident occurs, Kimberly and several others who were marked for death are not where the Grim Reaper expected them to be. Ironically, this happened on the first anniversary of the events from the classic original Final Destination. Instead of loudly exclaiming, "Them not again," Death doggedly goes to work, ratifying in the mistake, taking out the victim one by one. A freaked out Kimberly located the only survivor of last year's carnage. Claire Rivers is a padded cell and persuades her to join the Crusaders. So, with the aid of a cute policeman, Kimberly and Claire pay a visit to a Candyman, who once again babbles annually about death design. Once they leave them, everything definitely is not satisfying and delicious. Strange as it may sound, Final Destination 2 actually overlaps some territory covered in Minority Report. Kimberly frequently has a premonition about how her fellow doomed victims are going to die, and she uses these to try to save them. In actuality, however, the act of responding to the premonition sets in motion the events that lead to scorching and evacuation. The circular relationship of cause and effect is central to Minority Report and it's in play here. The difference is that the Spielberg movies engage at paradox while Final Destination 2 seems unaware that they exist. But that's what happens when screenplays are aimed at audience members who have willingly submitted themselves to fortune deprimes upon entering theater. It hurts to get which will cause more titles that lame dialogue or the pasty performance. However, while none of the actors show anything in the nature of promise, I have to admit that there might be hope for Dr. David Ellis. Granted, there's only so much he can do with the material, but the death scenes and the associated fakes and red herring that are intended to build suspense are presented competently and occasionally even with flashes of style. There's a fairly wide variation to how people die: pigeons, elevators, fire escapes, ladders, airbags, and a gas grill all have roles to play. The primary reason to give Final Destination to avoid Birth is its utter lack of respect for its audience. The movie mandates complete gullibility and wishes attention in order to work on any level. It does not bother me that the movie level in death, but there's nothing beyond the cardiac without character or a coherent plot. Why bother? The final destination ends up in the same graveyard as the first. Unfortunately, I suspect that Grim Reaper is already sharpening his scythe in preparation for Final Destination 3. Final Destination 2 from United States 2003, directed by David Richard Ellis, cast goes to Ellie Larter, H.E. Cook, Mitchell Landis, Trench Carson, Keegan, Connie Transit. Screenplay by J. Mikey Grover and Eric Briss. Cinematography by Gary Chenko. Music by Shirley Walker. US distributor goes to New Line Cinema. The runtime is 128 minutes. US release dated 1/31/2003. MP rating are wellness, profanity, and gender goes to horror. Critical aspect ratio 185 and 1. Final Destination 2 movie retro review. We have now arrived at the sequel slumps. Final Destination 2 is little more than an excuse to kill off more 20 something teenager in even more elaborate and incredibly unlikely ways. It has become clear that Death would score poorly on any performance reviews as the dude continued to miss his mark and spends way too much work time trying to fix his mistakes. Under normal circumstances, I might find that endearing, but in reality, I mostly find that hard to believe. Death, an entity that has been doing his job since the dawn of time itself, is actively being outsmarted by a group of angsty kids, and you may ask how. The answer is occasional premonition, flash in the pan vision of future dome. How can these kids see the future? No one knows. It just happens. Apparently, and it is not always spot on. In the movie, Kimberly has premonition that a bunch of people will die in a fatal log disaster on the highway. It's a gruesome image, but it never actually happens. She chooses to block the road with her car and thus dooms herself and everyone else to death. Later, she is informed of the events of the first film, and after some research, learns that Alex Browning, the protagonist of Final Destination, died off screen after the movie was done from being hit by a dislodged brake. Seriously, why? The last survivor of Flight 180, Claire Evers, is not a willing inmate in a psychiatric ward because that is clearly more honorable than simply accepting death and enjoying what life you have left. She wants Kimberly to watch out for sign of death. As such, Kimberly continues to have vision that shape the way she handles everything, even though they are about as understable as a drunk mime. It was frustrating watching Final Destination 2 because it was not a horror film as it belied itself to be. The original was a decent flick with an original idea and some unique yet somewhat plausible death scenes. Destination 2 is a completely different beast. It's not even a thriller as much as a poorly acted teen drama with some dead people thrown in for good measure. Which is not to say that the death sequences are poorly done. so much as they act as a minor payout for sitting through a muddled mess. Death is everywhere. It lurks in hospital corridors, crowded elevators, and streeny ponds. It sulks through picks and spans suburban neighborhood, rural farms, and skylit urban tenements, as all encompassing as the air breathe. It measures your minutes and hours, then decide when they should end. But death is not infallible, as Kimberly has just learned. On the anniversary of Final Destination's Flight 180 explosion, Kimberly has a vision while she is driving up an interstate on ramp, pile-ups, explosions, fire, blood, lots of blood. Terrified, she hits the brakes, blocks the ramp, and then watches helplessly as the wholesale slaughter unfolds on the highway. But Kimberly and those who survived the catastrophe should not think they have cheated death. The rules are simple. You see, once death places you on its list, it will not stop pursuing until you die. Ashlam inmate Claire Rivers can testify to that. One of a handful who escaped from Flight 180, she watched her fellow survivors perish in freak accidents. She huddled fearfully in her bedroom, hoping death will not find her. Will Claire succeed where her friend failed? Can the ragtag group of strangers led by Kimberly and police officer Thomas Burke death's design after watching disposable character bite the dust in spectacularly bloody fashion for 90 minutes will audience care? Early in the film, Kimberly's dad shows great love for her by trying to ensure her safety during a road trip. Believing she has a responsibility toward those she saved from the interstate pileup, Kimberly tries as hard as she can to prevent their lives. As one point, she chastises Claire for hiding in the ashram instead of trying to help others. Before he dies, a stoner asks Kimberly to throw away his drugs and pornography so that his mother will not be heartbroken when she goes through his bloggings. In order to save others, Kimberly sacrifices her own life but is later resuscitated. Specular content. The introduction of Final Destination 2 is a thesis on its metaphysics, where a television interview a theorist states that people are surrounded by a malevolent force which decides when they will die. The speaker scoffs at the idea that it should be called the devil, preferring to simply name it death. Those who manage to sidestep its plan only slightly postpone their demise. A spooky Motoni worker further explained to Claire and Kimberly that only new life can defeat death. The meaning of the phrase is much debated. Otherwise, it will continue to stalk you. The film's plot follows those principles to a T. Elsewhere, a man claims that the alone control his life, not only spiritual force, and a cross-wearing woman says she is unfair to join her family in heaven. In one previous situation, however, she frantically screams that she doesn't want to die. Kimberly has numerous visions about the future. In a scene director David Ellis described as totally graduation, a motorcycle riding woman flashes at two guys calmly fly about. If death is a nearly all powerful force that can manipulate nature, environment, and human action, should not it kill its victim and an embolism as they slept? 3 years after what I consider to be a smash hit, Final Destination 2 hit the world. This film followed the same premise with an entirely new cast of doomed youth, save Ellie Larter in return as Claire and Tony Todd as the creepy coroner. If it's broke, don't fix it, right? Protagonist Kimberly and her friends head out for Daytona but are interrupted when she sees a vision of a freeway pileup leading to mass casualties. After her suspicion proves accurate, she and a random assortment of people do their best to cheat death. Their sequel had an uphill battle from the start because I love the first one. And despite their best efforts to reference the first one and even tie the story into the original character, the series of convoluted twists and turns, it just was not the same. It did not help that they kill off Alex in an idiotic way between the first and second film. It is always lovely when a sequel recognizes its origin, but I feel this film tried too hard. Their chemistry bounced off the screen and you cared about them. Final Destination 2 movie review. Haslik Dongan, I am back to review another movie about the inevitability of death, Final Destination 2. If you have not watched this before, buckle your seatbelt and strap in and watch it first because there may be spoiler in this review. On the surface, it seems really silly to have something called Final Destination have a sequel. After all, would not Final imply it's the last, but the sequel does work and it actually connects fairly well to the first. In the second film, we start off with something way more likely than death by plane crash. Instead, it's death by car accident. Kim and her friends are about to drive out of town for a fun little getaway. She sees a huge, if somewhat unlikely, series of events resulting in a major traffic accident where she and a bunch of other people die. When she snaps to, she takes action and blocks traffic. Kim and several other people are spared death. Unfortunately, her friends end up dead anyway. Kim has heard about the events of Flight 180 and the freakish death afterward and realizes she has just experienced something similar. Claire, played by Ellie Larter in the first film, is still alive, so Kim goes to see if she can be any help. For the rest of the movie, characters are trying and mostly failing to avoid their own inevitable death one by one. I think the interesting twist in this one is how each character is somehow connected to the passengers who survived Flight 180. They come up with some rules for how to defeat death, although I'm not sure those rules really make much sense. There are points where a lot of the characters simply ignore things they should not or take unreasonable actions. But Kim and Claire, for the majority of the film, play it smart, and Kim has the best idea of them all. I will not spoil that here, but her methods does seem responsible to defeat death, in my opinion. It's a clever sequel, and it once again has Tony Todd adding in an extra layer of creepy in the way only he and maybe someone like Boris Karloff can. If you like the first film, this is not a bad follow up, and I do recommend it. It's just not quite as clever as the first, although I do think overall it is better acted. Inevitably yours. Horror film Final Destination 2. After I watched Final Destination, I watched its sequel 2003's Final Destination 2. Final Destination 2 is not only one of the best horror sequel ever made, but it's also the film that, even more than the first installment of the series, established that we consider to be a typical Final Destination film. The characters are far more eccentric and the deaths are far more elaborate. Death itself shows a sense of humor that was not present in the Final Destination film. If you manage to escape death the first time, death is not just going to track you down, it's going to play without and have some fun before it's finally filled its quota. Final Destination 2 opens with Kimberly Corman having a vision of a crash on the interstate. She is so freaked out by her vision that she blocks the entrance ramp. This may save the life of everyone stalls behind her, but it also ends up killing all of her friends when a truck smashes into her SUV. Fortunately, Kimberly survives because she had gotten out of the vehicle to talk to a policeman named Thomas Burke. So the bad news is that all of the Kimberly friends are died. The good news is that Kimberly has a whole new group of friends, all of the people who were supposed to die on the highway but who are now alive and on death to over list as a result of Kimberly's actions. Along with Kimberly and Thomas, Death now has to take care of lottery winner Ivan Lavish, stoner Rory, neurotic chain smoker Kate, teacher Eugene Dex, and Nora and her son Tim. It turns out that death is not only after them because they didn't die on the highway, but also because they all have a connection to the death that occurred in the first Final Destination. It's actually a pretty clever idea, and it also provides an excuse for Clear Rivers to return from the first film and act as a sort of death guru. Needless to say, the deaths are elaborate. In fact, they are so elaborate that Final Destination 2 occasionally feels like a statical take on the first film. It's not just that Nora loses her head in an elevator accident, it's that there just happened to be an old man carrying a box full of claws on the elevator. In another scene, Rory looks aside a closet and sees hundreds of things that could possibly kill him. My favorite being the bowling ball that just happened to be precisely balanced on the top shelf. When Claire Rivers returns, she does not just explain how death works, she also gives them a list of safety persuasion that make her sound like an overly protective parent looking at her son or daughter's apartment and freaking out over how many appliances have been plugged into one outlet. Final Destination 2 is a clever film with an appropriately dark and macabre sense of humor. On the one hand, all of the characters are well written and the cast is so likable that you don't want to see any of them die. On the other hand, death is so inventive that it's hard not to want to see what it has to up its sleeves. And like the first film, the sequel works because it gets at a universal truth. You can avoid death but can never truly escape it. Final Destination 2 movie is a horror movie and the sequel of the movie The Final Destination that is released in 2000. Final Destination 2 is ironically great after 15 years. Final Destination 2 came to theater on January 13, 2003, 15 years ago, which means 2 days also the 15th anniversary of me trying to convince everyone it's one of the best sequel ever made. I don't mean that ironically the way I love so many other horror movies from the same time period like the Ledrica's House on Haunted Hill, 13 Ghosts or the Saw franchise. A Final Destination 2 is the legitimately an excellent movie. It's a fun and suspenseful film that managed to improve on the original in every way while also standing entirely on its own. The premise of Final Destination works so well because its simplicity is terrifying. People don't have to fear some supernatural monster or crazed killer, they are being haunted by death itself, unseen and inseparable. It's coming for all of us, making it the most realistic and awful terror of them all. But that makes death far more menacing in the second movie in the characters' knowledge of what happened in the first film. The people who cheated death in the original didn't immediately know it was only a temporary reprieve because the sequel exists in a world where the survivors of Flight 180 all died in mysterious way. The people who avoided the opening car crash here understand the horrible truth of their situation. They survived, but they know death is still coming for them and there's nowhere to run. The extra added tension for the characters dramatically increase the emotional weight of their struggle. This makes them more compelling. The audience can get more invested for a movie that moves quickly and had loads of fun with the over the top death scenes. It still has genuine pathos, especially because these strangers quickly band together to help save one another. When they do die, their death or everything would not want from Final Destination. A giant plane of glass crushes a teenage boy. His mom gets decapitated by an elevator. A barbed wire fence shoots off like a cannon, slicing someone into pieces. The movie managed to walk the fine line of still being scary while also making the payoff to those moments as entertaining as the premise promises. The rest of the sequel don't. They are basically comedies. As a Final Destination 2 final hilarious scene I hinted at, they that are ridiculous at the point and half the fun, but the build up to them is sinker. The movie is not trying to be The Shining or Extra Kids as it is supposed to be a fun throwback horror movie that is sequel part scary and humorous, which it pulls off perfectly. What is even more impressive is how Final Destination 2 is both a solid sequel that connects and improves on the original. While still working all on its own, the characters all have personal, eerie connection to the events and survivors surrounding Flight 180. For example, Ellie Larter 180 survivors Claire Rivers is seamlessly integrated in an organic way that makes sense for his new story. And thought this is a sequel, you don't have to be familiar with the first film to enjoy it. Final Destination 2 gives enough exposition to help you appreciate the main plot and what the characters are dealing with. The movie also adds an important element the first seemingly took away a way to beat death by creating new life. Without that added rankle, it would not be as suspenseful. And yet, even if none of that was true and the whole movie was a mess, it still gave us one of the best sequences of any horror movie ever. The opening vision of the highway peel up, the first movie showed a plane crash, but that's possibility you only have to face when you fly. But people drive every day, and all monsters know the creeping feeling of fear on the highway when a huge truck is a little too close or the road is a little slick and someone is driving recklessly. You probably never think about the original Final Destination when you fly, but I bet you think of Final Destination 2 every time you are near a truck carrying logs or poles. Any horror movie that stays with you that long has done something right, and there's nothing ironic about that. What do you think of Final Destination 2? Where does it rank in horror movie history? Don't be afraid to tell us what you think in the comments below. Final Destination 2 horror as a genre trains fans to expect, look for, and even anticipate death in the movies we watch. Final Destination took those exact specifications and created a franchise out of it. With hindsight, it's now way too easy to look back and pick apart the earlier entries and forget the things that they did right that made them popular enough to warrant multiple sequels. Final Destination 2 took what was set up from the original, kept aspect of the tension, but embraced the ridiculousness that was always under the surface of the original. This time around, the film follows Kimberly, played by A.J. Cook, and a group of friends on the highway of a spring break vacation when a log truck causes a catastrophic and violent peel-up. When all is said and done, Kimberly wakes up back in the car and realizes that she has just had a premonition and blocks the road in an effort to keep the victim in her vision from dying a horrible death. While explaining herself, the accident unfolded just as she had envisioned. Before long, the survivors start to die one by one in bizarre and horrific accident, prompting the rest to scramble and find a way to cheat death once and for all. As with most sequel, the endgame here is pretty simple: make the death bigger and better than the first. In some respects, David or Ellis succeed more often than not is upping the ante. The opening death scene is one of the series' best, and by the looks of it, uses as little CGI as possible, which makes some of the shots even more impressive. The approach to the death scene takes on a interactive component with the viewer as this installment as with the rest, have set it up for the audience to assess the dangers to each victim. The clues are seen in brief vision that Kimberly gets throughout, but what she sees is often not what causes the death, but the catalysts that lead each victim to their ultimate demise. The downfall of Final Destination 2 is an unintended consequences from embracing the stillness of it all bad acting. Additionally, Ellis seems to have struggled a bit with tone from time to time. It's impossible not to laugh when triumphant daytime TV music plays just after characters have escaped certain death, and yet, despite an unfortunate mix of bleak violence and unintentional comedy, it's hard not to have fun along the way. One thing is certain: Final Destination 2 and its brethren bring out the sadistic, bloodthirsty beast in all of us. As brainless honor entertainment, it gets the job done. It's not always pretty, but in a way that is what's charming about it. Like the original, this sequel is far from perfect, but was a marginal step in the right direction of the series. At a time when the teen horror film genre has developing into metalcore efforts like disturbing behavior and idle hands, New Line came along with the superbly entertaining Final Destination. It was a teen horror suspense film which, instead of relying on cheap serial killer stalkers, went for the more grandiose concept at that itself. A formless dark shape was stalking these people and setting up an elaborate series of accidents which eventually lead to each one's demise in unique and over the top gory ways. Two of the X Files best writers, Glenn Morgan and James Wong, who created the first film, have now left the franchise. Many of its key personnel, from actresses Ellie Carter to super producers Craig Perry and Warren Sapp, remain to churn out this sequel. The good news is it's a hot Final Destination 2 may lack the interesting character and slightly more complex storyline of the first feature. Instead, it in for even more gore and laughs with a whole new cast of young unknowns. From the opening and utterly spectacular massive car crash to numerous and unique deaths involving the likes of plate glass, barbecues, barbed wire, and more, we are regularly taunted and tricked into believing various red herring in regards to how each subject is going to die. But when it happens, it proves quite spectacularly forbid and colorful each and every time. They cast two solid jobs with the material, Ellie Larter turning in a decent co turning as the now institutionalized Claire Rivers, Whitelist, AJ Cook, and Matthew Landers make for likable leads. Tony Todd puts in a deliciously fun cameo too. False. A subplot about a pregnant survivor never really clicks, with the exception of Larter and Lance, who's most remembered of a brief stint on Lewis and Clark. The stars are complete unknown, which may turn some off from the material. The gorier age make this less accessible than the first film, and the somewhat pandemic talk about a rift in death design does get overdone and over-discussed a lot. Finally, the new twist to it for this film is fun but never truly convincing. The important thing is a sequel go. This is a very good done and hopefully will lead to other shooting for this franchise. You don't have to be a twisted and disturbed individual to get a lot of enjoyment out of Final Destination 2, but it sure helps. Final Destination 2, shame they did not get the destination right first time around. Final Destination was something of a sleeper hit back in 2000 and deservedly so. It took an extremely jaded genre and made a network. They attempted injecting it with some fresh ideas. Sure, it was not perfect, but there were enough shocks moments that you did not really want to care too much, and everybody went home from the cinema giggling nervously. whilst keeping an eye open for potential danger. 3 years later, and here we have the inevitable sequel. You can expect it to capture some of the original film's freshness and inquiety. No, not really. To be fair, Final Destination 2 has its moments. The film opens with our heroine pre-motion of a horrific motorway pile-up. It's an extremely well orchestrated catastrophe that managed to be quite unsettling and supremely graphic. At this point, I had hope. Unfortunately, it's pretty much downhill the rest of the way, with the film following the template of its prequel utterly by the numbers, the only difference being the gore factor has been upped quite substantially and the script quality lowered somewhat. The davishly cute AJ Cook plays Kimberly Corman, whose prominence saves her own life and those of a group of otherwise doomed motorists, but cost her that of her friends. It's the first anniversary of the plane crash that sparked the events of the first film, and Kimberly seeks the knowledge of the first film's only survivors, Claire Rivers, again played by an obviously cash-needy Ellie Larter. Kimberly knows death will be coming after the survivors and needs her advice on how to cheat its design. Claire has booked herself onto a psychiatric ward as a means to escaping death's intention after her boyfriend, the first movie Devon Sawa as Alex, died in yet another freak accident. Given that the couple spent their whole time taking plans to avoid anything at all hazardous, the scriptwriter have explained away his passing by the wonderfully left field random happening of a falling brick. Quite where the brick came from is never explained. Presumably, Death got so pissed off trying to nail the sucker that is resorted to Looney Tunes methods. He is perhaps lucky that it was something as dignified as a brick and not a grand piano or a giant anvil bearing the legend 100 tons. This should be ringing alarms bell as it quite clearly denotes the desperation of the studio to repeat the success of the first movie. Third, the tried and tested Hollywood technique of making the nonsensically contrived set pieces even more oblique than the first time. Hence, we are subjected to 100 minutes of various set list, messlers being spiked, skewed, dissipated, crushed, burnt, cubed, and quite inspirationally blew up by barbecues. Yes, extremely entertaining. Hell yes. Yes, they are stabbed up and crapped up and marched out to die. There's some bare-faced attempt at depth by this time introducing the idea that death is now working backwards and that everyone who survived the motorway crash was somehow previously linked to the plane crash survivors from the first film. Someone somewhere mentioned death traveling in triple or something, and there I was thinking it only did straight lines, which apparently has something to do with something else that's something to do with another thing that's troubling them or Christ to you or really want me to go on. Suffice to say, if you can swallow any of this, be prepared to have the old lyrics thoroughly tested by the utterbile. They managed to regurgite that was once a scriptwriter's idea of that old fashioned thing called dialogue. If you don't laugh at lines like, if Claire was right, that means Nora and Tim are going to be killed by pigeons. There are clearly something wrong with you. If this is an existential conversion as an American 20 something can muster given the circumstance, then the whole world is in trouble. It's all very humorous to the casual observer, but what's disturbing is that none of it appears to be tough in cheek. Only the film's final scene shows any sense of self awareness that provides an internationally dark chuckle. For the rest of the duration, you might as well wear ear plugs and just go, oh, every time someone is spectacularly squashed. I could go on picking massive fault all day, but it would seem unfair. Even though I am not being at all best, I love the first film and desperately wanted to be able to even just like this one, but alas, I'm getting a bit old to be entertained by buckets of blood alone. Final Destination 2 has clearly been designed to scope a couple of quiet from teenagers' pockets of the back of the first installment success, and no doubt it will do just that. If only it could have managed a scrap of originality, it might have fared better. Unfortunately, this movie is a one-star wonder, boosted to a sympathetic mark of 2 out of 5 arbitrary disco units because the deaths are pretty spectacular and B, it's got Ellie Larter in it. Even if she has gone back to being blonde, oh, and that pagan lines gem, shame it never actually happened. Craig Disco has fallen asleep, see the above. Final Destination to what happened to every character basically. The Final Destination franchise traumatized many viewers over the years with its creative death scenarios. Final Destination 2 chief among them, the log scene from while driving down the highway, a police officer is completely obliterated by a log flying out of the semi truck in front of him, smashing through the windshield and turning the officer into nothing more than go. This and many of the other deaths made this sequel one of the best in the series and one of the most traumatizing. In Final Destination, the victims made their demise because they escaped death in the explosion of Flight 180. Kimberly Corman and her friends are on their way to spring break in Florida when she has a terrifying vision of a multi-car pileup on the highway, stopping traffic. Kimberly managed to save the people behind her from dying in the accident. Unfortunately, this only prolongs the inevitable. Those people were fated to die, marked by death by their connection to the Flight 180 disaster. Because of Kimberly's invention, and maybe because it's a sequel and they needed something new, Deathless is reserved from her premonition. The survivors of Route 23, along with the final survivors of Flight 180, Claire Rivers, die one by one in Vensner and observes ways. Here's what happened to each character. Kimberly Corman escapes. In a rule that only applies to this entry in the franchise, new life is the only thing that can stop death. Kimberly and the crew imagine that this means they must save Isabella Hodson, a pregnant woman who survived the highway incident. When they discover that Isabella was never meant to die in the pile up, Kimberly realizes that it's not birth, but restriction that will stop this curse. Mimicking that she saw in an earlier vision, Kimberly drowns herself by driving a van into a lake before she is rescued and resuscitated by Bork. While she makes it out of Final Destination 2 alive, Kimberly and fellow survivors Tomerberg may not have lasted much longer. In an alternate ending to Final Destination 3, a newspaper reveals that both died after falling into a woodchopper at a hardware store. Dano Stanage, Frankie Whiteman, Shayna McLean SUV explosion. Kimberly's friends Dano, Frankie, and Shayna die in the same way that they die in the Kimberly's vision, with the only difference being that they were supposed to die last. The three are sitting in Kimberly's SUV when a semi-truck certain several cars blows into the vehicle. It triggers a huge explosion that finishes off Kimberly's car and her friends. Ivan Levish impaled through the eye. After escaping death by semi-truck, lottery winner Ivan Levish meets an early demise with his apartment catches fire in a predictably absurd chain of events. It begins with Ivan's cooking shirtless and tossing oil on his gas stove like it's not a problem. Next, a magnet happened to drop from the fridge into a dish of food, which Ivan misses before putting in the box in the microwave. He then drops a diamond ring in the sink and gets stuck trying to retrieve it. The pan catches fire and the microwave oven will not start sparkling. Ivan stuck in place and swats at the growing fire, making it immensely worse. He eventually managed to wriggle his way out of the sink and escapes the apartment through the window. Thinking she's made it, Ivan falls to the ground before he is swiftly impaled by the falling fire escape ladder. Tim Carpenter crushed by falling pane of glass. Tim and his mom Nora was also made to burn to a crisp in the Route 23 disaster, which would probably have been better than the way they end up going out. Expecting the worst, we watch as Tim sits through the dentist apartment of his nightmares. After a series of mishaps, a plastic blowfish almost chokes Tim to death, but he is saved at the last second. Thinking he has avoided his fate and souped up on way too much nitrous, Tim chases after a nearby group of pigeons outside and falls directly in the face of a construction worker operating a crane, causing him to drop a pane of glass directly on him. He is crushed into a shapeless goo, his loss to joy the pigeons. That would be his undoing, at least it was quick. Nora Carpenter, decapitated by elevator. Nora is still reeling from her son's death when she is met with an equally gruesome and absurd fate. The scene starts with her and fellow survivors Eugene Dex leaving Bart's apartment by elevator. In the elevator with them is a man holding a basket of hook hands. After Kimberly, Bork and Rory sees an image of a man with hooks and decide he will be the one to kill Nora. They frantically call and inform her of the danger. Nora, assuming this must mean the man is the elevator is dangerous, freak out. Her hairs get stuck to one of the hooks and the elevator doors close on her neck when she tries to leave. With her head inside and her body in the hall, Nora is eventually decapitated by the elevator. Cat Gigan's impaled through the head. Cat death is probably the biggest instance of absurd incompetency in Final Destination 2. While driving Rory, Claire, Eugene, and Bart to the hospital where Isabella will save her baby, Kate's tire has a blowout, sending the vehicle creeping off the road and into a nearby farm. A ton of PVC pipe flies through the back window and nearly impales Kate through the back of the head, but it just misses. Kate is okay but pinned in the car. When a snarky firefighter tries to rescue her with the jaws of life, the motion triggers the drive side airbag, forcing Kate's death back and straight into a sharp piece of PVC pipe, killing her instantly. Roddy Peter dissected by flying fence. Meanwhile, a newsman arrives to capture this scene. As fate has it, the van runs over a rock sharp throw to trigger a huge gas leak, which eventually travels all the way to Kat's car after she dies. Kat drops her lit cigarette to the ground, sparking the flame and triggering another huge explosion. Most everyone is out of the way except for Rory. The force of the explosion sends a barbed wire fence flying toward him, and the wires dissect his body, the pieces sliding off each other in a cartoonish, grisly fashion. Eugene Dex and Claire Evans incinerated in oxygen explosion. In the car accident with Kate, Eugene is punctured in the lung by one of those deadly PVC pipes. He is rushed to the hospital where he is doomed to meet his maker. As he lies in bed listening to the news about Kate and Rory's death, Eugene notices strange things happening in his room. The air vent closed, the tubes on his oxygen tank snaps, and his defibrillator gets pulled loose from its electrical socket. Eugene panics, but the defibrillator soon activates its emergency power supply, and things seems like they are will be all right. Meanwhile, Claire arrives at Lakeview to make sure Eugene is all right. She meets up with Kimberly and Brooke, who informs her that everything is over because Isabella's baby was born. Immediately, Kimberly snaps back to the opening premonition, realizing that Isabella was not one of the foreseen victims. Panicking, Claire rushes through the hospital until she finds Eugene. Upon opening the door to his room, a spark from the loose defibrillator plug ignited the oxygen that's been building up in the room and burst into flames, incinerating Eugene and Claire. Thomas Burke escapes. Originally the victim of that infamous log, Officer Thomas Burke managed to escape death by the film's end. In Kimberly Vision, Borg is made to die after she and her friends, her death and destruction screw up the order and leaves Borg safe. For now. As mentioned previously, he dies via a wood chipper in some vision of the Final Destination lore. Brian Gibson Grill Explosion. Brian Gibson, the young farmer who first approaches Kate vehicle after the crash, was not supposed to die. He has no connection to Flight 180 or Route 23. And if the survivors had never crossed this path, he would not have been safe. After the car crash, Brian is nearly stuck when approaching news van. Rory saves him, thus adding Brian to death list. The film ends with Kimberly, her brother Michael, and Borg attending a barbecue picnic, and Brian and his parents at their farm. While Brian works the grill, his dad tells anyone about Rory's heroic deed. Kimberly and Burke widely look over just before the grill explodes, sending chunk of flesh and Vesnada flying. It's a particularly mean-spirited move from the movie, but in a franchise that relishes in its stupidity, Brian's unexpected death is an especially fun one. The real reason why Ellie Larter's Claire died in Final Destination 2. Claire's Final Destination 2 journey in the film series' second installment, but there is a hidden reason why her character was killed off before the third movie. The first Final Destination movie introduced Claire Rivers as one of the main characters who board Wally Airline Flight 180 but end up leaving the flight after Alex Browning forces that it will explode. Their initial brush with doom turns into a nightmare when death starts tailing them because of their initial defense towards it. Although many survivors from the plane eventually meet a brutal death, Claire and Alex somehow keep outsmarting their fate and end up surviving by the end of the first Final Destination movie. Unfortunately, even though their pursuit of beating their destiny continue in Final Destination, their death eventually catch up with them. Although Claire finally dies in Final Destination 2, the film's creator initially had different plans for her characters. Final Destination's creator always intended to kill off Ellie Larter's Claire. Final Destination's creator Geoffrey Reddick revealed that killing of Ellie Larter's Claire was always in the script. However, he wanted to bring back both Alex and Claire for another installment of the movie franchise. Unfortunately, some scheduling issue prevented him from bringing back Devon Sawa. Reddick also added that if things had been different and Ellie Carter and Devon Sawa and had returned, Claire would still have died, but Alex would have lived. He wanted to create an ending where Claire has a life that saves her life, but then death gets her once she has the kid, and Alex is still kind of the torch bearer. The screenwriter also mentioned that he would not have killed off Claire if he had known Alex would not return because he loves bringing original people back and not killing them. As Reddick early plan for the movie franchise suggest, Claire's Final Destination arc would have been significantly different if he had been prepared for Damon Stava's departure. Claire's arc in Final Destination 2 could have been way different. The first movie in the franchise has two deleted scenes that reveal Claire was pregnant with Alex's child. Final Destination 1 also has an alternate ending where Claire meets a different fate. Both Claire and Alex survive the incident at Claire's house in Final Destination ending arc, allowing them to return for the sequel. In the alternate ending, however, Alex precious but Claire managed to defy death in the nick of time. Before the film credits start rolling, Claire has a baby, Alex Browning, too. Although bittersweet compared to the original ending, this one did not make it to the final cut because Geoffrey Reddick wanted both characters to return for the sequel and was unprepared for Devon Pawa's sudden departure after Final Destination 2. Final Destination Brian's death in Final Destination 2. At the very end of Final Destination 2, a boy named Brian, who has previously saved from being hit by a truck, dies from an exploding grill. I think the reason he died in that death is corrupting its plane, since Brian was supposed to die before. However, I thought the main character drowning and then coming back alive was supposed to prevent all characterational death. I mean, this is the whole reason that the main character and the cop were able to live in the end. Brian was not in the original list of Route 23. Brian has saved during SUV crash scene, so maybe his death has nothing to do with Route 23 death list, and that's why he got his end after he cheated death list. Final Destination 2 movie is the second film in the Final Destination series, released in 2003. A year after the Flight 180 explosion, Kimberly and her friends on her spring break when she receives a premonition of a massive car pileup on the highway which kills them all. She managed to avert the fates of several people, but once again death returns to hunt them down. Aztec's Lessons is killed when a barbed wire fence is sent flying by a nearby explosion. A barbed wire fence doesn't even come close to having enough mass to be able to be thrown by a shock wave, and probably also would not assist the guy. In a case that lampshaded in the behind that scene material, the logs falling off the truck and bouncing when they originally filmed it, the logs just fell into the road and rolled off it. Ascended extra. A meta example as James Kidd, the actor playing Tirk Carpenter, was an extra in Final Destination who was wearing the same jersey as Carter Horton. Big no. Kimberly, after she witnessed the truck crash into the SUV that her friends on killing them. Black comedy. At the end, the two surviving characters are having barbecue with the family they met earlier when all of a sudden there were a barbecue explosion. Final Destination 2 ending explain. Final Destination 2 ending a riveting conclusion to the intense thriller. Final Destination 2, released in 2003, is a gripping horror film that delves into the concept of fate and the inevitability of death. Directed by Davis R. Ellis, this sequel to the 2000 hit movie Final Destination follows a group of individuals who narrowly escape a deadly highway accident only to discover that they cannot avoid death. Design with its intricate plot and shocking twist, the film's ending leaves viewers pondering the implication of their own mortality. In this video, we will explore the enigmatic Final Destination 2 ending along with 7 unique facts about this captivating movie. The climax of Final Destination 2 takes place at a memorial service for the survivors of the highway accident. As the characters begin to believe they have cheated death, they realize that they were merely pawns in a much larger plan. The protagonist Kimberly discovered that the survivor of the first film planes crash are also present at the memorial, suggesting that death design is an intricate, interconnected web. The film concludes with Kimberly's premonition of a massive car crash, indicating that death plan is far from over. This ending leaves audience in suspense, questioning the extent of death influence and the possibility of escaping its grasp. One fact is special effect mystery. Final Destination 2 features exceptional practical effect, earning praise from critics and fans alike. The intense car crash scene, meticulously choreographed by renowned stunt coordinator Sparrow Resorts, showcases the film's commitment to realism, connecting to the original. This sequel seamlessly integrates with the first film Final Destination by incorporating the survivors from the plane crash into the narrative. This connection adds depth to the story and expands the franchise mythology. Easter eggs galore. Final Destination 2 is filled with clever reference to the first film regarding attentive fans from subtle visual cues to recurring characters. These Easter eggs create a sense of continuity and rewards viewer dedication. Audition coincidence. Several actors who auditioned for Final Destination 2 went on to star in the subsequent sequel. The Serpentius casting choice for the strength of the franchise, interconnected universe, and showcases the talent pool involved. Complex character arc. The movie offers complex character arc, taking the audience beyond typical horror film stereotypes. Each character struggles with their fate, providing a glimpse into the human psyche and the fear of death. Psychological exploration. Final Destination 2 delved into the psychological tool of knowing one's impending doom. It explored theme of paranoia, survivor's guilt, and the struggle to accept one's fate, adding depth to the film's narrative. Box office success. Final Destination 2 was a commercial success, grossing over $90 million worldwide. Its popularity led to the creation of several more sequels, making it one of the most successful horror franchises of all time. Are the death in Final Destination 2 predetermined? Yes. The film explored the concept of death design and suggests that each character demise